Today, on Guess What I Found Out, farmers spent 10,000 years accidentally breeding their worst enemies. And in doing so, they also accidentally invented some of their best crops. Curious George, welcome to one of the strangest stories in the history of agriculture. It starts in the Fertile Crescent, roughly 10,000 years ago, where humans were just figuring out this whole farming thing. They were growing wheat and barley, pulling out weeds, saving seeds, and doing it all over again. Simple enough, except one category of weed had a secret weapon. It looked almost exactly like wheat. Same height, same leaf shape, same seed timing. When farmers walked the rows, pulling everything that did not belong, these weeds just blended in. They survived. They got harvested alongside the real crop. Their seeds got replanted, and generation after generation, the ones that looked the most like wheat were the ones that made it. No one planned this. No one was trying to create a wheat impersonator. But by punishing every weed that stood out and accidentally rewarding every weed that fit in, farmers were running an unintentional breeding program. The scientific name for what came out of it is Vavilovian mimicry. The man behind that name is Nikolai Vavilov, a Soviet botanist in the early 20th century who is, honestly, one of the most fascinating and tragic figures in the history of science. Vavilov travelled to 64 countries across 5 continents, collecting seeds from crops and wild plants to build what was essentially the world's first major biodiversity seed bank. He wanted to understand where crops came from and how they could be improved. And in his travels, he kept noticing the same pattern. Weeds that looked suspiciously like the crops growing around them. His explanation was elegant. Farmers removing non-mimics generation after generation were acting as a selection force just as powerful as any drought or frost. The weeds were not consciously adapting. They were just varying randomly, the way all living things do. And the variants that happened to look like crops were the ones that survived long enough to reproduce. Darwin's mechanism, driven entirely by human error. If the story of accidental mimicry is making you want to follow Guess What I Found Out for more, go ahead and do that now. New episodes drop regularly. Now, here is where things get genuinely surprising. Some of those mimics did not stay weeds. They became crops. Rye is the most famous example. It started as a weed in wheat and barley fields, slowly evolving to match the life cycle and appearance of the crops it was hiding among. As agriculture pushed northward into the colder parts of Europe, wheat struggled. But rye, tougher and more cold-tolerant, thrived. Farmers who had been cursing it for generations suddenly realized it was producing more reliably than their intended crop. So they started growing it on purpose. A weed that survived by pretending to be wheat eventually replaced wheat entirely in huge stretches of northern Europe. Same story with oats, about 3,000 years ago. But not every mimic story has, a happy ending. Barnyard grass has been terrorizing rice farmers in Asia for about 1,000 years. This weed, native to tropical Asia, evolved in the rice paddies of China's Yangtze River basin sometime around the Song dynasty, when a population boom really intensified rice farming and, well, with it, the pressure of constant weeding. The more aggressively farmers pulled anything that did not look like rice, the more the barnyard grass evolved to look exactly like rice. Upright stems, compact growth, deep green color. It is nearly indistinguishable from young rice plants until it is far too late to do anything about it. A 2019 genomic study traced all of these mimic populations back to a single origin event around that time, and identified 87 genes involved in the physical changes, including one called Lazy One, which controls whether a plant grows upright or at an angle. The weed's ancestors drooped. The mimic stands straight. One gene shaped by 1,000 years of farmers trying to do the right thing. Today, barnyard grass is one of the most damaging agricultural weeds on the planet, cutting rice yields by more than 35% in infested paddies. Rice feeds billions of people. This one weed is not a minor inconvenience. And now for the part of the story that absolutely should not be left out. Nikolai Vavilov, the man who identified and named this entire phenomenon, died of starvation in a Soviet prison in 1943. His crime was defending genetics. Stalin had thrown his support behind a rival scientist named Lysenko, who promoted the idea that acquired traits could be passed to offspring, a claim that genetics and basic biology had already disproven. Vavilov publicly disagreed. He was arrested, his research was dismantled, and the seed bank he spent his life building was nearly destroyed. The irony that a man dedicated to preserving food for humanity was starved to death by his own government is almost too heavy to sit with. He was vindicated by science decades later. Every one of his core ideas about crop origins, seed diversity, and how selection shapes living things over time turned out to be correct. Drop a comment below with a fun fact about Vavilov, rye, barnyard grass, or anything else from today that caught you off guard. And let's see what Curious George has been up to. If this episode earned it, a like and subscribe helps more people stumble onto the channel. We will see you on the next one.